Before this video begins in earnest, I would like to elaborate that this video essay may or may not include critical spoilers for the plot of Night in the Woods. If you are interested in the game but have not yet played it, I recommend that you exit off this video, play the game, then return to this video at a later date. Night in the Woods is worth your time, from my point of view, if you have not yet played it. If you have played, then let us begin the essay. Before I begin, I wish to preface all of this with the addendum that this video essay is purely a labor of love, meant to entertain and hopefully ruminate on why Night in the Woods is such an important game to me. My ideas and conclusions on the game and themes are purely my own, and might not be your ideas and conclusions. My conclusions are based and shaped by my life and my experiences. People have different lives and therefore have different experiences and therefore have different conclusions. I have played many games in my life, but only a few games have created such a personal reckoning with me that they have touched me to my core. Any game can weave a tale about good versus evil, light side versus dark side. While all those themes can be constructed well, it is almost poetic that Night in the Woods is not a grandiose space opera spanning several games about a renegade space mercenary with a heart of gold, wasteland wanderer imparting a cautionary tale about the folly of nuclear war, or even a heroic sword-swinging barbarian adventurer chosen by fate, slaying dark gods to save the world from certain doom. This game is about a deeply flawed girl simply trying to hold on to the past because she is afraid of the future. This is Night in the Woods. Before I can give you the setting for May's tale, I feel it prudent to give you the setting I found myself in 2017 at 21 years old. I was at a critical turning point in my life. I was 21 years old, working at Walmart on the night shift as a stalker, having an excellent time with my friends and about to attend my first convention, which can actually be found on this channel. A link will be provided in the description below. But aside that, it was a time of peril and growth, where the fortunes of youth could be won and lost in the blink of an eye. I first learned of Night in the Woods from Instagram. I saw it and was instantly piqued by the unique art design and the anthropomorphic characters. And in general, I was interested in Kickstarter games due to the smashing success of 2015's Undertale by Toby Fox. Not long later, I purchased Night in the Woods on the PlayStation Network and started playing it, and at the risk of sounding dramatic, my life was changed forever. Night in the Woods takes place in the quintessential small town of Possum Springs. You know the ones. Closed-up businesses, abandoned factories, aged parks, looming buildings whose architectures echo a time long since past. But for a child, it was as good a place as any to call home. At a casual glance, Night in the Woods may appear uninteresting and downright boring. I believe it's because the subdued gameplay choice, coupled with the game's stellar but ultimately relaxed soundtrack, that kept Night in the Woods a niche title and kept it from garnering the same level of fame Undertale was enjoying in 2017. To the uninitiated, Night in the Woods may just look like a game about a cat girl running left or running right and occasionally talking to people. And honestly, speaking very broadly, it's not an incorrect assumption. But if you can give the game your time, explore the town of Possum Springs, and really listen to the people inhabiting it, then I believe the game rewards you with a very enriching experience about a coming-of-age story that hits uncomfortably close to home for a lot of us, no matter who you are. Possum Springs was an environment that I instantly took to, mostly because I lived in a dead cell small town in the Rust Belt in my youth. Ironton, Ohio is a small hamlet whose glory days of the 1920s have long since passed, and were long past by my time. The town is now a shell of its former self, host to a handful of families. Smaller, outlying communities like Coal Grove and Rock Hill. Even though the town was dying, Ironton, just like every forgotten small town in Rust Belt America, was inhabited by those stubborn few who still woke up every day and worked hard, even though they were made the butt of every joke and vilified in media as bigots by coastal liberal elites for merely existing and abiding by different sensibilities that simply were not theirs. The world told small town people, "We don't want you anymore." And the small town person replied, "Yet here I am." Which is kind of admirable in a way. And that was something I could never reflect on until I saw it portrayed in Night in the Woods. Ironton, Ohio even had a great flood, just like Possum Springs, and even the dying Kiowa Mall. There was a local pizza chain everyone loved, a haunted school, the Coal Grove Monitor, abandoned cement factory, Meehan Steel, AK Steel. There was even a sub-region literally called Possum Hollow. So playing this game was literally like coming home again, which served to accentuate the weight this game was about to depart on me. But the moment I knew this game was going to be special was the moment May heard that train horn outside the bus station. It was the first time I had heard a train horn blare in nearly 2 years. When I lived in Ohio, I can personally attest to hearing those noises every night. What was mundane yesterday is precious today. I did not appreciate them at the time, but when I heard it, I was instantly home again. Game-wise, Possum Springs is divided into 6 main segments of the town you can return to daily. There is the bus station, Sawmill Park, and the graveyard, but you only go there once on certain occasions, so for the sake of brevity, I will slice Possum Springs into 6 main locations. The bridge into town, Maple Street, which includes May's house too, as she mentions with Lori Myers, Church Hill, the defunct subway tunnel, town center, and the outskirts with the abandoned food donkey. Possum Springs, like the game en masse, is done in a unique and stylized art design with warm colors that ooze personality, which will make Night in the Woods graphically immortal. In 2037, 20 years from now, Night in the Woods will still look as good as the day it released, whereas games with more realistic approaches to graphics will eventually date themselves. The sunsets are warm and make you feel good inside, and the nights are dark, gloomy, with the red glare of apathetic electrical towers and abandoned factories in the distance, marring the landscape, haunting the player with how prosperous Possum Springs used to be. This all is contrasted by the intense, warm light coming from windows of apartments and remaining businesses, showing life is still going on. If you have played the game, you should know these denizens of Possum Springs. But for a refresher, May has 5 main compatriots she keeps regular company with in Possum Springs. This section is just so everyone can have context for when I mention this character or that character in the next section. Margaret May Borowski is the main protagonist of Night in the Woods. She is a 20-year-old cat girl, presumably born in 1996 or 1997, that grew up in a relatively stable, lower middle class environment. May is a single child who lives with her mother and father. May was close to her grandfather, who passed away before the beginning of the game's events. May and her grandfather seem to share a rebellious streak in their own time. Her parents are Stanley and Candace Borowski, the quintessential Gen X parents. Her father, Stanley, used to work as a miner, as Possum Springs used to have one of the few mining industries left, and had a drinking problem, but now works at the Ham Panther Delicatessen, where his most egregious trespasses against his family are now his dad-tier jokes. Candace, or Candy, Borowski is May's mother. May and Candy's relationship is a bit more strained, as Candy is more pressing on discovering why May quit the field at college, despite how much resources the lower middle class family marshaled to send her to college. Stanley is curious as to May's departure from college as well, but is more cooled in his attempts to learn about it. And May spends the majority of the game dodging this question from her parents and ultimately herself too. She has recently dropped out of college despite being the first Borowski to ever be able to attend college. While May's reasons for leaving are kept secret to everyone but her, over the course of the game it is revealed May, due to her tenuous mental health and history of depression and disassociation, had a nervous breakdown due to the pressures of college and became a recluse in her dorm before finally making the decision to abandon higher education and return home to Possum Springs, much to the dismay of her parents and other residents of Possum Springs. Gregory Lee is a Vulpine dude who enjoys leather jackets and knives. He is very loyal to May, who he's known for the majority of his life, since May and him were delinquent children who committed several petty crimes such as vandalism and shoplifting. Angus Delaney is a shy and tech-literate brown bear who is the quiet one of the bunch. Of all of May's compatriots, he is the least known, simply because he is very reserved. Angus is a good-natured fellow at his core, but is occasionally stressed out by Greg's aloof nature and his proclivity to be easily distracted and brought off course. Casey Hartley is a rough-and-tumble man that played the drums in their band before being replaced by Bee and her computer. Casey, like Greg and May, had a rebellious streak, but lacked good authority figures in his life to keep him centered, and therefore ended up rubbing shoulders and finding himself in the company of actual serious criminal elements, though this was long after May had departed for college, and the group was more or less departed ways. All his life, Casey was said to have remarked to the gang a desire to stow away on one of the incoming or outgoing trains and leave Possum Springs forever. May learns Casey finally made good on this desire and is never seen in the game. Jeremy Wharton, Germ Warfare, or more commonly nicknamed Germ, is a peculiar birdman who serves as the group's wild card. He is quiet like Angus, but his interests are much more unorthodox, in that none of the characters can quite pinpoint much about Germ, except that he is simply odd. But a good odd, not serial killer odd. Germ lives in the woods outside Possum Springs proper, and spends most of his days in the outskirts of town, where he meets and talks with vagrants, hobos, and runaways who stow away on the trains that run into and out of the town. Lastly is Beatrice Santeo, or B, my personal favorite character of the game, second to May, but it's a microscopic close second. Beatrice is a chain-smoking goth crocodile lady. Even though she is 2 months younger than May, her tragic life turns have made her far more dour, cynical, and downright colder than her years should indicate. This premature but profoundly ingrained cynicism came to be after her mother died of cancer in her senior year of high school, where B was named valedictorian. The cost of her mother's treatment and subsequent funeral forced the Santeos to sell B's childhood home and move into an apartment down on Maple Street. And to top off the tragedy, her father had a nervous breakdown after losing his wife. Because of this, Beatrice took it upon herself to set aside her plans for college in order to take up the business affairs of the family business, a hardware store named the Old Pickaxe. As time progressed, B was submerged deeper and deeper into hopelessness as she saw her dreams of college slowly passing her by, and in time she began to resent everything, even her own father, in his enfeeblement. If I could describe May Borowski with a term of phrase, I think calling her a rebel without a cause would be an apt way to describe her to someone who never heard of Night in the Woods. One could even say May is a bad person in terms of being irresponsible to others, lacking discipline and self-control, and generally being self-destructive. But I like to think the story of Night in the Woods is a personal quest where May has to face her inner demons of anxiety, frustration, and indecision to go from a bad person to a little less of a bad person. But when I said May was a rebel, though, I meant it. But she is unwittingly undertaking the Herculean task of rebelling against the most dangerous foe of them all. May is rebelling against the passing times. May, like all of us at one point or another, seeks the old days of innocence, even if she, the written character, is not versed enough to express this notion. This is a sensation I get from May, from her dialogue and from her actions. May returns from college to home, to Possum Springs, desperately hoping she can reattain that fleeting innocence from a time past, a time before jobs, bills, the economy, global events, social media, and the creeping paradigm of automation and unemployment. I think there are times a lot of us want to wake up to a simpler world. No more dopamine chasing from validation on social media. No more burning your retinas looking at a screen or phone for hours in a day. Fast food joints that had a theme to them instead of soulless, inoffensive corporate wannabe cafes. Playing Nintendo 64 at McDonald's while you waited for your food. Forming fictitious biker gangs with your friends called the Saber Scorpions. Sleepovers with your friends. Going to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters and going to Burger King afterward to get the Star Wars Happy Meal toys. All things I did. Contrasted with the currently highly polarized and stratified nature of society today, it is 100% natural to opine for simpler days. But some fall prey to eternal nostalgia for a world that does not exist anymore. This desperate rush to immerse herself in the nostalgic simpler days is so prevalent that it is even the first act May undertakes that begin the entire game, returning to Possum Springs. After an unceremonious arrival where her parents unwittingly forgot what days she was due home, May begins her unconscious quest to retreat to the past. But as May re-explores Possum Springs, she learns all is not as she expected. The statues, welfare office, telesoft, and possibilities are the same, but the most important element has changed: the people. Time has not stood still for May, nor the denizens of Possum Springs. Everyone has lived their own lives, for better or worse. Possum Springs did not remain in stasis while May was away, and this is no truer than with her friends. May naturally begins to reconnect with her old friends Gregory Lee, Angus Delaney, Beatrice Centeo, Germ, and Casey Hartley. The unsaid hope is that May can regain a sense of normalcy from things and people she already knows. Unfortunately for May, she learns that her friends have all done their own growing, even here in Possum Springs. All of May's compatriots now have jobs they tithe their time to for payments like everyone else. Not long after this, the gang discover a severed arm outside the diner they're eating at. This begins the game's cultist plot, but for now it is little more than a macabre but ultimately unremarkable event worth remembering until later. The day after this, May is invited to a party up in the woods with some of their old high school friends. At this party, May gets drunk out of nervousness when she discovers her ex-boyfriend from high school is attending and makes a drunken fool of herself and causing a scene, leaving B to take her home to sleep off her inebriation. After this, May finds herself in a warped dreamscape of her old college in Drakilsburg. These dream or nightmare sequences are the only time in the game where Night in the Woods has something approaching more recognizable gameplay, in that May can move and attack things even though she is alone in these sequences, save for the ominous shifting shadows of people that she cannot interact with. In this dream, May, or the player, are tasked with smashing up parked cars, trash cans, and the lights of Drakilsburg before destroying the statue of the founder, which May mentions having a particular aberration to. This proclivity to random acts of violence is one of, if not May's largest negative characteristic trait. Throughout the game, May and other characters make mention of the time May hospitalized an unnamed boy at a Little League game as a kid. This, May explains, was the first of her mental breakdowns, which caused her to lash out and attack this boy unprovoked with a baseball bat. Naturally, this made May a pariah in Possum Springs, and her parents had to refinance their home in order to pay the legal fees and no doubt hospital bills of the attacked boy. Lori Myers tells May the other parents in town instructed their kids to stay away from May because they were unsure when she would snap again and attack someone. In Greg's final chapter, Legends, May becomes frustrated at Greg and Angus's fighting and decides to vent her frustrations by trashing the Donut Wolf's bathroom. When she is stressed, May is prone to lashing out at her environment or people, which doesn't take a behavioral scientist to deduce this is a bad way to channel frustration. Even the soundtrack for the Drakilsburg dream sequence and the Donut Wolf bathroom scenes are actually remixes of each other. And I believe this is to intentionally mirror May's self-destructive outburst. Upon awakening from the dream, the game opens up, giving the player a much wider berth to explore in Possum Springs. Here, the player can start interacting with other characters and engaging in minigames that give the player bits and pieces of the world's lore and some insight and mindsets of the people May is interacting with. But the day will only continue on when May chooses Greg or B to hang out with. Both have unique hijinks and minigames for May to get into while advancing that character's respective plot arc. But due to the game's limited time frame, the player can only choose one character to hang out with. I enjoy Greg's story, but B's story arc is so great to watch that I cannot play the game without feeling legitimately bad for not being there for B. But as these days move on, however, May keeps on experiencing the same nightmares of a twisted version of Possum Springs inhabited by shadow people and 4 spectral musicians. These musicians, the player can discover, are called the Deep Hollow Hollowers. They were a jazz band from the 20s. All the members of the Hollowers could practice something called astral projection, the ability to project one's consciousness out of their body. It is implied that May somehow has the ability as well. The Hollowers used this ability to play songs for Ghost in the Woods. One day, the band never returned to Possum Springs. A police search discovered their bodies dead from exposure, frozen to their very instruments. While Night in the Woods leaves the supernatural aspects to the player's belief or disbelief, I believe it is too heavily implied to ignore that May herself can astral project when the soundtrack titles of the dream sequences are Astral Alley, Astral Coal, etc. But if you so happen to believe May believes there are no supernatural goings-on in the town, then one could possibly point to the microfiche minigame, where the player can stumble across a newspaper article claiming noxious gases from the mines were leaking topside and causing certain individuals to experience group hallucinations as evidence to support this mindset. But me personally, I choose to think May believes in the supernatural. And as an aside, I just feel it's too much of a parallel to brush off the fact that the Deep Hollow Hollowers are a band of 4, and May's band just so happens to be a band of 4. Make of that what you will. As the in-game days move on, May slowly begins to unravel as she cannot come to terms with the once familiar place and people of Possum Springs having changed without her. May acts out in the hopes of reattaining how she remembered Possum Springs when, on the night of Harfest, their version of Halloween, May witnesses a cultist kidnapping someone. May tries to help, but the kidnapper eludes her. When she finds this mysterious figure somehow jumped over a fence no normal person could reach, much less while carrying another person. After this, she becomes a target of the cult. The next phase of the game has May and the friend you select for the day undertaking an activity to investigate the cult, or what May believes is a ghost from her dreams. In these next few days, May's mental health goes from a decline to a full-blown plummet, as the astral projections wear away more and more on her already fragile psyche. In the final dream, May finds herself in the audience of a giant spatial cat creature, but this is no mere ghost or echo of what was. The cat creature is not hostile, but instead wholly disinterested in May entirely. The cat creature imparts an ill-timed message of nihilism, in that she, her town, and her friends are ultimately nothing on the grand cosmic scheme of the universe that is forgetting her and being forgotten at the same time. But most importantly, the cat creature warns May that she is tampering with forces beyond her perceptions with her astral projections. Blind and terrible, shapeless horrors beyond comprehension are being drawn to her like a beacon because of her repeated dreams. The spatial cat finally mentions a hole at the center of everything, consuming the universe and expanding ever outward. After this ominous revelation, the space cat tells May that it will close the sky and cut her off from her dreams for good. Then May wakes up. That night, after investigating with the second friend of your choosing, May experiences a sort of distortion in time and space. The gang convene at Greg and Angus's apartment, where May tells them about the weird sensations that she has been experiencing. She mentions a painful sensation in her mind, whenever the ghosts are nearby. Naturally, her friends are perturbed and doubtful, but when May explains she is going into the woods to get to the source of the matter, they all stand by her and choose to accompany her. Following May's half-baked lead into the woods, the gang, either through luck, perhaps some kind of unnatural intuition, or just going the long way around the fence in the outskirts and making their way up the hills, the gang discover the lair of the cult in an abandoned mine out in the hills. They stumble upon the cult in the middle of executing their own operative that was responsible for unknowingly leaving the arm in town and endangering the whole operation. But May and her friends are quickly discovered and have to flee for their lives. Everyone escapes except May, who falls into a ditch, being neither captured nor rescued. May is hospitalized later after she stumbles back into town and is discharged shortly after. But now May has passed the point of no return. May is physically weak, mentally exhausted, and now only has the singular goal of getting to the bottom of the ghost in her head. She has to return to the cult. At night, May sneaks out of her home and makes her way back to the cultist's lair. May is beset by a cultist in the woods, only to be rescued by Greg, who shoots the man with a crossbow. The others arrive in tow and tell May they will be with her until the end. Reaffirmed by her friends, the four make their way into the old mine. The group take an old elevator down and cross what appears to be a sort of chapel before descending deeper into total darkness. Only when the leader of the cultists lights a lantern does May discover she nearly stepped into a pit in the mine. The cultist Greg shot, referred to as Ide, is angered at being shot at, but is told to stand down by the head cultist. The cultist explains that their cult was founded after a man named Ed Scudder discovered an eldritch entity in the pit that they have come to call the Black Goat. The Black Goat would help Possum Springs thrive and gift those in service to it with some manner of supernatural powers. In return, the Black Goat demanded regular sacrifice. This is why the cult has been secretly abducting miscreants, drifters, ne'er-do-wells, and generally anyone who would not be missed by the general public. This is when the cult explained the true fate of Casey Hartley. The head cultist explains they kidnapped Casey and dropped him into the pit because they saw he was on course to become a thug. A thug no one would miss if he were to simply vanish. Naturally, the gang are horrified, but the cult leader continues. He explains that the Black Goat cannot speak with words cast by vibrating vocal cords that mortals understand, but instead telepathically sings to the cult when it desires new souls to consume. All the dreams and ensuing psychological deterioration May was experiencing was in fact the Black Goat singing to May, a song mortals cannot comprehend, but a song nonetheless. The Black Goat chose May to become the new leader of the cult in due time. May's desire to have Possum Springs the way she remembered it must have called out subconsciously to the Black Goat on the ethereal winds, and it decided to sing to her in return, promising her what she always wanted. Except for the murder of Casey, May is actually surprisingly empathetic towards the cult. She understands their desire to have their lives be what was, not what is, not just shapes. Not just another abandoned small town in rural America falling into ruin and disrepair. They live seeking the past, unable to see the present, much less the future. And May cannot help but see herself in them, a warped, twisted phantasm of what she could be in the future if she allowed herself to be ruled by her nostalgia. Another bit of interesting information too is how earlier in the game, May's mother mentions how May was their miracle baby after a series of miscarriages, and if May's age and the origin of the cult in the late 90s is to be believed, one could postulate that perhaps the black goat could very well be responsible for Mrs. Borowski being able to carry full term, and that this intervention by an eldritch entity could very well have predisposed May to being more in tune with cosmic forces than the average person. This is not confirmed or denied, but I like it as a headcanon nonetheless, because I personally like the supernatural train of thought compared to gases around the town and in the mines, making a cadre of old miners around the town hallucinate about an old god in the earth that will save their town from the passing of time and changing paradigms of small towns. The cultists explain that they want May and her cohorts to take up service to the Black Goat when they become too old to do so. Naturally, the gang refuse, but the cultists tell them to think on it, and that they are free to leave. I personally believe he is not being truthful, however. I'm not a cultist naturally, but if I was part of a secret pseudo-religious death cult and needed new members, the last thing I would try is to recruit someone who couldn't possibly care or understand what my cult's modus operandi was, especially after confessing to the abduction and murder of Casey Hartley. I would choose someone like Stanley Borowski. First, someone not elderly, but definitely more easily groomed into seeing the cult's way. For me personally, I think the lead cultist is lying and fully intends to murder May and her friends the second they leave the mine. These are people who killed one of their own for merely endangering the operation. May and her friends are outright adversaries to them, so is it not beyond reason to suspect that the cult simply planned to gun May and her friends down the second they are no longer in the mine and stash their bodies in the hills? Fortunately, this is a question that never needs asked. As the gang are making their way up an ancient rickety elevator, they are attacked by a disgruntled Ide, acting of his own accord. He teleports into the elevator and a scuffle ensues. The brawl causes the elevator to malfunction, and soon the mine begins to collapse. Ide is stuck in the elevator and is trying to drag May down with him, but thanks to Angus and the others, Ide is unsuccessful and plummets with the old elevator to the depths. But victory is short-lived as the mine collapses and the gang finds themselves buried alive in blackness. Angus, using his old Boy Scout techniques, deduces there is airflow coming in from where they are, so they will not suffocate. Relieved, the group make their way through the new section of mine, until they stumble across a knee-high cave lake. But just as May makes her way across the lake, she has her final out-of-body experience with the formless Black Goat, and my favorite moment of the game begins. The terrible revelations of the night in the woods at long last gives May the insight she's needed her whole life, a lesson that will never come to the cultist. May finally realizes life is not about eternal stasis at all cost, and that fear, trepidation, and anxiety are all as much a part of life as courage, joy, and happiness are. Life is not about being paralyzed with anxiety to the point where you cease to live for anything meaningful, but instead, life is about accepting uncertainty. Nothing is certain. We are guaranteed nothing, not even the next breath, not even the next word I type. May learns nothing can save her forever, but a lot of things can save her for today. One day, her friends will leave, either through simple parting of ways or death. One day, her parents will be gone. One day, Possum Springs will be gone. And one day, Margaret Borowski will be gone. But impermanence is part of the human experience, and it's up to us to live our lives and decide what life is worth. One day, you will be gone. One day, I will be gone. One day, this video essay will never reach another person and will be lost forever. All people and testaments to our existence, literature, art, history, will be gone and lost to the passing of time. But Night in the Woods' message is not one of nihilism in the face of impermanence, but rather a message of overflowing hope. The future may not be perfect. Sometimes it may even be bleak. But we are here, and we will hold on, and we will live well until we die. What happens after death? That's something only you can answer for yourself. But what I do know is that we are here, right now, in this moment, and we have a choice. Accept uncertainty and live, or retreat from life and quit the field. I choose to live, and Night in the Woods was the first game to ever illuminate this idea to me in a way I could understand. And this is why it is such an important piece of media to me. This is why I decided to use my time on Earth to assemble this essay, so I could tell the world my thoughts. Even if only 50 people see this video in a year, that will be 50 more people I told if I did not make this video. And I hope this video, and Night in the Woods in general, impart a message of hope to you as well. It's up to you to live. Life will not always be glorious, but there will be joys worth having, and woes too. But in the end, you have to make the joy bigger than the woe. Never stop living. Love the past, but don't live for it. Instead, take the lessons of the past as a torch to illuminate the path to the future. And hopefully, when it's time to pass that torch to the next generation, that torch will be brighter, allowing the next generation to go a little further than we did. Was it ghosts, demons, antediluvian cosmic horrors? Was it merely a group hysteria of a select few people victim to hallucinations coupled with despair about the future? Does it even matter? It's just a video game, right? Possum Springs is not real. Mae Borowski is not real. She was a character drawn on a napkin at a pizza joint a few years back, and then turned into a video game protagonist. With this in mind, I want you to reflect on Grandpa Borowski's words at the end of the Lost Constellations game. Child May asks, "Did this really happen?" To which Granddad later replies, "Does it matter if it really happened? Hearing it happen to you, and that's something." Night in the Woods may just be a game, but the story happened to you, and that too is something. And this is my essay on Night in the Woods. Thank you to everyone who stayed and watched. I hope I was able to impart something meaningful or at least thought-provoking. Accept uncertainty, live, and live well. Until next time.